and making sure that the right people in the Army were on board with letting me come down and enjoy myself for a week. Absolute blast. You guys are great. You've been very welcoming and very gracious. It is a little nerve-wracking for me. I'm speaking on a subject that I've been involved in for the last 3 years, and I'm speaking to people who have been involved in it for 50 or more. And so I'm a little bit nervous about that. I'm sure some of you have seen me pacing outside my hotel room with a copy of my speech in my hand. So I'll ask your forgiveness for that, and I'll remind you that it is a very narrow slice of your world that I deal with, and it is the slice that is the Army and Arlington National Cemetery. I am part of the Old Guard, 3rd United States Infantry Regiment. We are the oldest active infantry regiment in the United States Army. We draw our lineage from the 1st American Regiment of 1784. We are stationed in Washington, D.C. at Fort Myer, Virginia, now Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall, as the official escort to the President, the ceremonial honor guard, and we are responsible for all Army and full honor funerals in Arlington National Cemetery. And I wanted to show you a short video prepared by the Old Guard Public Affairs Detachment that kind of covers what it's like to be part of the funerals in Arlington Cemetery today. The plan was to show you a video.
Slow them down. Yeah.
Now I've gone and broken it. Guard soldiers represent soldiers in all ceremonies in Arlington National Cemetery and in the National Capital Region. They also send representatives across the country and around the world. Competition for a position in the Old Guard is fierce. Only the top 10% of the Army qualify based on physical fitness, test scores, and applicable job performance standards. The U.S. Army Caisson Platoon is the last mounted unit in modern service. There are other horses in the Army, Fort Sam Houston, Texas, Fort Carson, Colorado, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Fort Riley, Kansas. However, those horses and those soldiers are in a historical role. Fort Riley, Kansas, where the westward expansion cavalry uniform. Fort Sill, Oklahoma does the World War I artillery demonstration. They have a full section with the old howitzers. We are the last soldiers in modern dress performing a modern mission in Arlington National Cemetery. A little bit of personal experience for it. It was a rainy spring day, similar to the one you see here. And I was coming back to the barn after a long day in the cemetery. I'd been detailed early that morning to ride horses that were not my own, so I was riding unfamiliar horses, and I hadn't planned on being in the cemetery that morning, so I had to shave my head before I went into the cemetery. I had to get a fresh haircut before I went in, and it was the end of a very long and tiring day. It was cold, it was wet. I had horsehair and my own hair down the back of my raincoat. The raincoat had done the best it could, but right about lunchtime it had failed, and so all the uniform I had underneath it was absolutely soaked. I think I poured about a pint of water out of my right boot when I got back at the end of the day. And I was just ready to be done. I was ready to be done in the cemetery. I was ready to be done with work for that day. I still had about an hour left of cleaning tack, and I knew it, we knew it, and the horses knew that we were ready to go back to the stables. But I got back at about 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, and I looked down the aisleway of our stables where I was tying off. We had big screen doors on the end, and there was a small family unit standing just outside the screen doors, kind of peeking in through the screen. We're open for tours from noon to 4 p.m. It's still during tour hours, so we opened the screen, invited the family in out of the weather. It was a small boy, about 4 years old. His mom and his grandparents were with him. And it turns out that my predecessor, the former operations NCO, Staff Sergeant T.J. Goodman, spoke with the family and found out that we had actually carried his father into Arlington National Cemetery. He'd been killed when the boy was about 6 months old. We keep records, so we went back and found which horses had been on the detail. And we were actually able to introduce the boy to the horses that carried his father. And he seemed pretty impressed with the size of the animals. He wasn't willing to get his picture made on one of the horses. But we did get him up on one of the McClellans in the tack room and actually got a picture of him on the harness for him, for his parents, and for his mom and his grandparents. And those are the moments that really make this job worth it. They make the cold worth it. They make the rain and the heat in the summertime. This is a wool uniform. And I know that it's not an 8,000-pound coat like our coachman was wearing, but it probably gets about the same temperature when it's the humidity and the heat outside, and so it is a little warm and it can be a little exhausting. But we're spoiled in the Caisson Platoon because we're open for tours, because family members can come see us, and they do. Often they come to the stables and they want to meet the horses and see the horses, and they tell us how important what we do is. And I kind of feel bad for the riflemen, the young infantrymen that you saw in that video that don't get that kind of feedback and that don't see the impact that we have every day on the family members of America's departed service members. And so not only for our brothers and our sisters that we're taking home to Arlington, but for their families. This has been probably the single greatest job I've ever held in my entire life. And I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do that's ever going to top it. But we are able to offer that last full measure of respect, and it's the attention to detail that we pay and the care that we take with the harness, with our uniforms, with our conduct. You can see the team there. They're actually in between missions on this, and so you might expect them to be a little more relaxed and a little more joking back and forth as we move through the 640 acres of Arlington. But all those soldiers out there take every moment very seriously, because we are the way for the Department of Defense to be able to tell the family members that they are not alone in their loss, and they're not alone in their grief. This is the best way we know to show the family members that their loved ones supported us too, and that the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, Air Force, we grieve with the families of our service members. The Caisson Platoon provides the mounted escort for all 5 branches. As I just said, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that have chosen to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, full honor funerals, which include the caisson itself. They also include a marching escort, and you can see the band there directly behind the horses in the back of the procession. Full honors also includes the band, the marching escort, colors team. You can kind of see the American flag behind the tuba there. In addition to the regular Army honors of a casket team that carries the remains and actually folds the flag and hands it over to be presented to the next of kin, and a firing party that fires the volleys. Common misconception, it's not a 21-gun salute there. What you're seeing is 3 rifle volleys, and 7 rifles, because if one of the rifles fails or 2 of the rifles fails, it'll still have the same sound of as many, the full squad firing. So we offer the Caisson and the military full honor funerals for those who've reached the highest enlisted ranks in their services, sergeants, major, chief, petty officers of the Army, Marines, and Navy, and for all warrant officers, regardless of branch, and all commissioned officers. We also offer it to the President of the United States in his capacity as the Commander-in-Chief, so we would offer it to presidents, former presidents, and presidents-elect. But we also have the ability and the obligation to provide a team at short notice for active duty, killed in the line of duty. If you are an active duty service member who's killed defending our country anywhere in the world, we can push a 3rd team into the cemetery in addition to the 2 that are usually in to support a full honors funeral. Only 45% of our funerals are actually Army funerals. In 2015, we had 25% for Air Force. The Navy was at 22% of our funerals. The Marines were about 7%. It is a smaller branch. And the Coast Guard, some of the Coast Guardsmen decided they didn't want to be put out to sea somewhere and wanted to come in on an international cemetery. So we provided the Caisson horses for them as well. So we have 1,714 full honor funerals last year in 2015. Now, a lot of those are World War II veterans, Korean War veterans. It's not nearly the active duty services that we were seeing at the height of the surge in 2007 and 2008. But what that means for us is we have 4 squads, 2 are in at a time. And so it's a 2-week rotation, and our weeks run from Wednesday to Tuesday rather than Monday to Friday, so that this team that is out of the cemetery and is in the stables rotation knows that they're going to be in on stables over the weekend, and it's going to take a few hours out of their Saturday morning, Sunday morning to clean up after the horses. We mentioned 59 horses in the herd, 42 of them are funeral ready, so 42 of our horses are trained and able to execute funeral services. The rest are either in training, awaiting retirement, or being used for training. You'll see some pictures of our training class, and we have some horses that are not a gray or a black, and they are the bays and the duns, and a couple of horses that we have for training purposes. So with the 2-week rotation, you're in for a week, you're out on stables, you're in for a week of riding, and then you're out on training. What that means for the squads, 1,715 funerals, 4 riding squads on a 2-week rotation. So each squad leader has 10 horses that he's responsible for, and from which he can draw his 7-horse hitch. So we rotate as we need to for injury or anything like that. We have a little more wiggle room than the grays at Her Majesty's Muse. But, and we can draw from the other squad too that's not in as well, so if we did have to. But what that means for each of the squads, it's about 430 funerals in 118 days in the cemetery. So out of every calendar year, Arlington Cemetery is closed for 10 federal holidays. We don't receive 4-day weekends in the Caisson Platoon because if Arlington Cemetery is open, we're open for business and we're at work. The soldiers that we select are actually selected from the old guard, top 10% of the Army, as I mentioned. But from those, we draw those that would be best suited for that line work. Obviously, first you have to volunteer, you have to express an interest in it. And then we have a competition for the positions that are come available. We host 3 training classes per year. We can train 11 soldiers at a time. We have 11 Western saddles that we can teach you on, and that's really what caps the number for us. And every time the Sergeant Major talks about manning and how we need to increase our training class size, we come back with a request for another $1,500 Western saddle, and he says, well, maybe 11 is a good number for us. That's what we're going to cap it at. You have 3 instructors, you're good, that's perfect. So we had 26 soldiers come out, wanting to be a part of the platoon. Of those 26, the first thing we do is we give you a physical fitness test and make sure that you're at the top of your physical fitness for the Army. And then we modify it a little bit to put a little more stress on you. There's a teamwork assessment where we put you under some physical stressors in a group environment and want to make sure that you're going to be sharing your weight of the load. You're not going to be the guy that hands it off to somebody else and lets them carry your weight. Because we move in small teams. We move in 4-man teams in the cemetery, 4-soldier teams. And we need everyone to be a team player and everyone to be part of the organization rather than an individual out there. So of those 26, 12 actually made it through the assessment. We sent 12 of them down there with the understanding that we had 2 or 3 that we were a little iffy about. And we don't get out of the groundwork stage until week 2 or 3 anyway, so before we put them under saddle, I'd be willing to bet one or two of these guys voluntarily pulls himself out of the training program. And as it turns out, we actually lost 7 of the candidates through the training program, and 5 graduated. So 26 came out and said they wanted to be part of the platoon, and 5 made it through the program. So you can see how difficult it can be to get a slot in the platoon and how demanding we are. But it is because of the solemnity of our mission. It is because of the importance of what we do. There are 5 positions in the platoon that are not filled by tryouts. They are filled by the regimental leadership, the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant, the 2 men in the platoon that tell me what to do every day. We also have our own veterinary technician that's assigned to us. He's an Army veterinary technician, and he is obligated to have some large animal experience. He came to us from Fort Pachuca, where they have an equine facility out there. The Border Patrol uses the Army facilities in Fort Pachuca, Arizona, for their horse care, so he's got a lot of experience with large animals, and he's a phenomenal vet tech. But then we have 2 saddlers that are Army. Their Army job is actually textile repair. So they would have been the ones sewing the uniforms, sewing the patches on the uniforms, repairing the uniforms in deployment when we're overseas. And many of them, that job is kind of being phased out with the more modern uniforms that we have. And so they got here, one of our guys had not seen a sewing machine in 6 years that he'd been in the Army, and he shows up, and we showed him not just a sewing machine, but a leather sewing machine, various tools for the saddlery trade, and he was just a little bit taken aback by that. But he's taken to it like a fish to water, and he's doing a great job in our saddle shop. And those 2 positions are job specific. So other than that, the 56 soldiers, 5 of them are filled by big Army or by leadership. The other 51 positions are up for grabs, and it's just who's best for the job at the time. The regimental commander and the command sergeant major have authorized applicants from any mission occupational specialty, any job that you can do in the Old Guard. You can try out for the Caisson Platoon. In fact, you can see her there on the front horse. That's Staff Sergeant Christine Baldwin. Her job in the Army is an Army illustrator, and that is her primary job. She's a graphic designer. She's actually left the platoon recently and is now teaching that skill up at Fort Meade. But when she tried out for the platoon, she was one of the better applicants we had. We were very excited to have her. So anybody can try out. Anybody that can get to the Old Guard can try out for the Caisson Platoon. But you do have to get through the basic Army horsemanship course, which is one of the more challenging courses. It's only 9 weeks long. You guys all know I'm going to take a guy from street to saddle in 9 weeks. I'm going to teach him everything he needs to know about horses, everything he needs to know how not to hurt one of our horses and how not to kill himself. That's really all we can teach you. Other than that, you'll have to learn it on the job. The 9-week course is taught at our satellite facility on Fort Belvoir, Virginia. We have about 10 acres down there where we do the training, and that's the 11 horses and saddles that we have. Start out on the ground. The first week is pretty intense classroom. We do, our vet tech comes down and teaches signs and symptoms of colic and injury and thrush, and we do a class from our farrier and his assistants, give a class on hoof care, and I do about an hour-long brief on history. And by the end of it, their eyes are crossing and they're falling asleep because they've been getting up at 4:30 in the morning and the lights aren't out until 9 o'clock at night. They actually live in the stables for that first week. We call it ranch week. And we put sleeping bags down in one of the open box stalls right on the bedding with them so they can get used to the sounds of the stable at night, and they can get an idea of how dependent our horses are on the soldiers, having to see the conditions and having to be in the conditions that they live. So most of the soldiers possess no prior equestrian experience. I had none. We kept chickens and rabbits when I was a kid, and I kept the chickens, and my sister kept the rabbits. But they don't lunge well, and you can't really get a harness on them. So I didn't do a whole lot of driving, and I didn't do a whole lot of riding when I was little. There's one picture of me. I was 3 years old, and my feet are still on the saddle because my legs weren't long enough to get it off the side. But that's it. That's all I had with horses before I came to the Caisson Platoon. So we do get to the question period. I asked for you to remember that. But last year, the Army formally recognized the training that we received. The Army recognized it as a viable school and as a good skill to have, and so they recognized us with an additional skill identifier of Delta 2. And we now all carry the skill identifier military horseman. It goes into our permanent records, and so I have that on my records forever. And it allows us a couple of things. It allows the Army to recognize the sacrifice of the soldiers and the efforts that they put into learning the trade. But it also allows us, in a more pragmatic way, to reach back into the regular Army and find soldiers that have been assigned to the platoon before and met the qualifications and criteria, and be able to pull them back to the platoon over time. The Army is a fluid organization, and you don't get to stay in one place for very long. It helps with personal growth, but it also keeps you from stagnating and lets you see new perspective. It's a good system. But that way, if we're getting short, we need to out of the hat and find some guys to come back. But 80% of our students that make it through the first 2 weeks make it through the whole program. So the first 2 weeks are really kind of the crucible, and they're kind of the telling period where you find out if someone is able to grasp the teamwork-based aspect of our training and our program. And it is very teamwork-based. We teach a light touch, a light feel, joining with the horse. We teach paying attention to the other riders out there with you, because riding postillion on a 6-horse hitch, only the wheelers have the breeching. The lead and the swing don't have a breeching. There's no hitching. There's no single tree, double trees in between us. And so when the wheeler stops, it's not fair to the leaders and the swingers for the wheeler to have to stop all four. It's not fair to the wheeler either. So all 3 riders have to be paying attention, stop their hitch together, start their hitch together. We don't have brakes on the carriages anymore, so we don't have to fight that. But we are at a walk anymore. We're not at a canter or a gallop, and we're not crossing the battlefield as we were in World War I. So the brakes really aren't as critical as they may have been. Driving postillion is incredibly challenging for our novice riders, particularly, actually, the ones that have any kind of horsemanship experience. We had a kid that was one of the better riders that I had seen, and he had a horse. Apparently, his mare back home was one of the best cutting horses you could imagine. And if you could just look at the cow, she would get that cow out of the herd, and she could heel, and she was a header, and she could do all manner of stuff, and he just wouldn't stop talking about her, and it was fine, except he's now responsible for his other horse as well, and it was a very difficult transition for him to go from thinking about the one horse he's got to actually thinking about the pair, and to being able to control his off horse as well. But another advantage that our soldiers have, our horses are incredibly experienced. We have a soldier with 100 funerals. He's riding a horse that's got over 1,000. Our horses, average age of our herd is about 16, 17 years old right now. And so our horses have been in the cemetery doing races for 5 years, some of them for 10 years. Sergeant York, the riderless horse that you saw being led through, his racing name, some of you may be familiar with, Allward Jules. And he was a standard bred racer before we got him. He has been in the platoon for 15 years. He was sold in 1990. He was President Reagan's comparison horse in 2004, and we'll see another picture of him here in a little bit. And so the horses really kind of spoil us a little bit. If you just sort of if you're confused about what you're supposed to be doing right now, just sort of let the reins go, and the horse will probably figure it out for you, which can be pretty helpful. But there's a picture of our training class, and that's some of the work that we do, a little bit of groundwork in there, and you can tell that soldier is probably pretty new to the process. The horse really understands what it is that soldier's asking of him at that point. But you can see in the background, too, the different colored horses that we have for our training program, and they're all pretty phenomenal. Anywhere between 14 and a half to 15 and a half hands. We don't really get you to the big boys until you get up to the stables. And so you'll think that Duke is the biggest horse you've ever seen at 17 hands. Then you get up to Meyer and you meet Sarge and King at 18 hands too, and realize, no, this is what a big horse really looks like. Another shot of the training class, and those soldiers probably a little bit further along in the training, a little more comfortable with it. And that near horse, actually, that red roan, Tazi, the one with the diamond right in the middle of the sport, that was my training horse, and I'm partial to him. That's why I picked this picture. Probably the best horse that I've ever met. So now you guys have seen the best horse. But our horse, we have on our staff a certified equine appraiser, and that's Mr. Robert Brown. There's a picture of him there. He's also our farrier. He's our herd manager. He's the owner of the 20-year plan for the herd. And it's his curriculum that we teach the new soldiers. He draws his riding style back to the vaqueros and back to the lighter touch and softer feel, and joining with the horse a little bit less of a directive approach. And it's very good for us, very good for the horses. And it helps that he's the one that's actually in charge of buying our horses. So when we go out and buy new horses, he goes out and spends the Army's money on some good ones for us. And he's also, on the flip side of that, he's responsible for determining the retirement dates and ages for our horses as well. The ideal retirement age for the horses is 10 years in the traces or 20 years of age, whichever comes first. So if we buy an 8-year-old, they'll be getting retired hopefully at 18. We do have some that are a little older than that right now. We have a couple that are over 20. Hale and Hardy still able to do 4 funerals a day, no issues. But again, the workload that we're asking of them is not, we're not taking the Alps by storm, and we're not running the back roads on Catalina Island. So it's all at a walk and it's all on asphalt. So when we adopt our horses out, we would like to transfer them to state and federal agencies. We've seen some good successes. North Carolina has a Caisson now. North Carolina State Troopers got some of our horses a few years ago. But we also see a lot of success adopting out to private citizens. We actually had a petition for and had the law changed in 2010 The previous law said that military working dogs could be retired to private citizens. And the idea was that as a dog reached the end of its service life, the handler could adopt the dog and take the dog home and have the dog as a good retirement for the dog. But the problem is we have military working horses. So we actually got the law changed, a very small change now. It says military working animals can be retired to private citizens. However, it is easier to adopt a human child, I think, than it is to adopt a Caisson. This packet is about this big. We want pictures of the facility. We want pictures of the stables where the horse will be quartered. We want to know about the herd that the horse will be put in with. We want a letter of recommendation from a veterinarian, a letter of recommendation from a farrier. We'd like to visit the stables if you're close enough to the Fort Myers area that we can do it low cost or no cost. There's a no sell, no transfer clause. We have a letter from our veterinarian that goes with a certificate of veterinary inspection, and all our horses are obviously up to date on all of their shots and all their medicines, and their teeth are flooded regularly. But there's actually, to the extent that if you, for any reason, you adopt one of our horses and it turns out that the veterinary bills are extensive, or you're moving, the situation changes, and you can't care for the horse at the level that you had thought you'd be able to, you can bring him back. We will take responsibility for the horse again and find the horse another home. Because these horses, as I said, thousands of funerals around the National Cemetery. They're not animals, they are teammates. They are part of our platoon. They're our brothers and sisters, and they just happen to have 4 legs and a lot more pulling capacity than I have. And so we want to make sure that they're taken care of. So our herd itself is actually pretty mixed. We have a few percherons, a few pure percherons, but we also have some standard breds, some thoroughbreds. There's a couple of our percherons there, and that's the only driving hitch we have. And so I beg you, don't think about any of the other carriages that you've seen on this screen. This was made by a couple of guys behind our blacksmith shop. We took an old car trailer. Those are car tires. That front axle rotates. We don't need any kind of bumper guards or anything. This is up above it. It's a real tongue off the front, a real whiffle and single and double tree on the back. But those are 2 of our bigger horses, and that's why I wanted to show you this. Sarge is the white horse that's on the near side. He's our tallest at 18'2". King is on the other side. He's 18'1", and they're both pure percherons. Sarge weighed in at 1,925 pounds last month when we weighed him, so he probably do with a little bit less training in the mornings. But he is one of the wheelers. He and Amos are the wheelers for 4th Squad, the White Horse Squad. King and Bud are the wheelers for the 2nd Squad, which is the Black Horse Squad. There's King and Bud, actually, in our Christmas rig. Take Santa Claus down for the garrison tree lighting on Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall. It's always a big hit with the kids. And that is the extent of my driving portfolio right there. That's me sitting up there on the point. And that's it. That's all I got. And they picked me to come down and talk to you guys. Super excited about it. Have a good night. So, the smallest horse we have is Sergeant York. There's another one. There's my other curriculum vitae. That's me as General Washington. I don't know how that picture got in there. That's strange. There we go. There's Sergeant York. Sergeant York's our smallest one, all aboard Jules. He's a standardbred racer. And he was donated to us. He's 15 hands and weighs just under 1,000 pounds. He's the smallest horse we have in a herd. But he's not ridden, typically. He is he's never ridden. And if the soldiers that are specifically responsible for his care thought anybody was thinking about riding him, there might be a fight in the other barn about it. But that's him in New York City. We were invited up by the 69th Infantry, the New York National Guard. The St. Patrick's Day Parade is always led by the 69th. And this year last year, 2015, was the 10th anniversary of the New York National Guard's deployment to Afghanistan. So they asked us to come up and honor all of their Gold Star family members, all their family members that had lost loved ones to the War on Terror. So we were, of course, honored and very, very blessed to be able to go up there for that. But York, Sergeant York, 24 years old at the time, walked from 35th to 82nd on 5th Avenue. Not a hiccup, not a bump. He was fantastic, a consummate professional. And he was the comparison horse for President Reagan in 2004. Anytime you see a picture of a small black horse wearing brown boots reversed in the stirrups, that's Sergeant York, and that's President Reagan's funeral. You know that President Reagan was an avid horseman himself. He actually rode a couple of our horses a few times. And those are his boots. A car actually arrived from the White House a few days before the funeral service asking if we would do the honor. And of course, someone immediately established a chain of custody on those boots and said, "You were responsible for them. It's not me. You got them." But we were able to put the boots on the harness and send him down to represent the President of the United States. So that was exciting for us. The smallest horse we have on the hitch is just a little bit bigger than York. He's 15 hands 1, and that's Rio, and he weighed in at 1,120 pounds. Most of our horses are closer to 17 hands and a little bit closer to 1,600 pounds. The long-term plan calls for 15 hands, 15 to 16 hands, 1,300 to 1,500 pounds. We're trying to get back down to the regular field artillery size horses that would have been used to haul the Caissons at the turn of the century. Actually, I'm going to go back to York real quick. So that riderless horse, that is actually an honor that is given to Army and Marine Corps officers in the rank of colonel or above, and it's awarded to the President of the United States as Commander-in-Chief. But that is a cavalry tradition, and that is literally the only thing in our stables that actually comes from the cavalry. We offer it to Army and Marine Corps officers because they're the only branches of service that had cavalry in their history. And it's a flat officer's saddle, it's an English officer's saddle, with a cartridge box on one side and an officer's saber on the other, boots reversed in the stirrups, and it does represent the mount of the deceased. And so there's actually a little attachment point back there in the tail of the blanket, where for general officers we'll have the corresponding number of stars, 1 star for a brigadier, 2 for a major general, and so on. And so that is led behind the procession, immediately in front of the family, so behind the caisson. That goes back to President Lincoln. He was the first American to have that ordered in a state funeral. His own horse, actually, Old Robin, Old Bob, was led behind his funeral procession as it toured the United States, all 38 states at the time. And then President Washington actually did have a horse led behind, but it wasn't any kind of an official state function. It was in a mock funeral procession that they had for him in Alexandria, a town that sort of adopted George Washington as their own. So we provide that in Arlington Cemetery as well, but only about 11% of our funeral services involve the comparison horse. The soldiers that are chosen for that detail are among the best. So you've got the top 10% of the old guard. From that, we pick the ones that are best for us. From that, there's only 4 positions for a comparison horse walker. And so those soldiers, you can be pretty confident, are some of the finest and most dedicated, and they have the most drive and the most understanding of the honor and the solemnity of their mission. And then we have some other, a little more relaxed horses. Klinger. Klinger is our gentle giant. He is a Percheron, 17 hands, 1,680 pounds, so he's kind of a little fat heavy. But he is the sweetest horse you could wish for. He was foaled in 2000, came to the platoon in 2005. He was actually the subject of a children's book, Klinger, A Story of Honor and Hope. The book explains Klinger's mission in Arlington National Cemetery, and it is presented to surviving children who have lost family members at war. They get it with a little tied Beanie Baby plush Klinger doll. It's a small black horse with a white lace on his forehead. And it's the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors are the ones that have sponsored that whole process. And they come to the D.C. area pretty regularly. They come to Arlington Cemetery every Memorial Day weekend. But they come to see Klinger every chance they get. And 2 of my favorite things are the looks on the kids' faces when they come around the corner to meet Klinger and they realize, oh, he's a lot bigger than the doll. And if you catch Klinger off center, if you're a small child anyway, he doesn't care as much about my feet, but if there's a small child under his feet and you catch him when he's off center, he'll actually stay there. I've seen him stand in an uncomfortable position, what's clearly not comfortable for him, because there's a small child running around his feet. He will not pick his feet up, he won't shift his weight. That's one of the reasons why he was chosen for the detail, but he's just absolutely fantastic with the kids. And that is actually him at the Washington International Horse Show. 2 years ago, they honored us with the creation of the Klinger Lifetime Achievement Award. And it's a cup that's presented to the organization, individual, or animal that best embodies the spirit of service that Klinger lives every day in Arlington Cemetery. And so last year, a therapy horse owned by Mary Jo Beckman won the award. 2 years ago, it was Klinger himself, the inaugural presentation of the award. We have the cup upstairs, and my current boss didn't know what it was because he had it facing the wrong way. I was like, no, it's got this big cup up here. Turn around, boss. We'll need that in October. Take that back down to Washington Horse Show. But there's the caisson itself. The caissons we use in Arlington Cemetery today are not reproductions, they're not replicas. They are original production made by the American Carriage and Foundry Company, model 1918 field artillery caissons. They were built to haul ammunition for the model 1897 French 75mm howitzer that American service members adopted after the 3-inch gun. So one of ours actually has a data plate on the drawbar that says 3-inch gun. So it's a 1917 build of the model 1918, and every other way it's identical to the other ones we have with the tow bell. Would have been a little bit different to haul the old 3-inch gun. We have 5 in the fleet. That's just one of them. Four are on active service with the 4 squads I spoke of, 2 white horse teams and 2 black horse teams. The 5th one is constantly in retrofitting. We send them down. The one we just got back from our paint shop, and so that'll be fitted with that pretty casket deck that you see on the back, that pier there with the stars on the side. And then the least serviceable of the 5 will be examined and determine which one needs to refit next. And that'll get partially dismantled and taken down to our paint shop and be sandblasted and given a high-gloss modern paint job. And then it goes through our own farrier shop where there is a detailed quality control inspection and any necessary repairs are made. They inspect the frame, the moving pieces, the axles, the lunette and pennel, limber pole, double tree, single trees, the springs, the drawbar. If necessary, we are able to modify the pennel. There was an automatic pole support on the old 1918s, but the Ordnance Depot has been shut down for years, and I can't find anybody to take my request for them to repair the parts that they were responsible for repairing in the early 1920s. So we have to do it in-house. We have to raise the pole height to between 31 and 38 inches, depending on the height of the wheelers. It is force dependent. We want it to be just below the point of the shoulder on the wheel repair. So we have 4th squad with Sarge, who's 19.2. And we have 3rd squad white horses, but their wheel pair is closer to 16 and a half hands. So you got to bring that pole down pretty significantly for those. So historically, the blacksmith tended to do double duty as your farrier since he had all the tools in hand and had an understanding of metal at base level. Ours actually goes the other way around. And our blacksmith and our farrier winds up being the blacksmith. Mr. Robert Brown has 2 soldiers assigned to him that he teaches. This is one of them. That's actually a pretty phenomenal photo that an Air Force staff sergeant came and took. Let's see if I can zoom in for you. That's one of our guys pretty hard at work there underneath one of our horses. I don't know if you played with the lighting a little bit. That's definitely a black horse, but it doesn't look very black on my screen. It looks a little blacker on yours. And so our farriers wind up doing double duty as our blacksmiths, and they're responsible for a lot of the metal work that we have in the platoon. And so we don't do as much as the Ordnance Depot would have done, but the 2 soldiers and the civilian that work in our shop are responsible for everything that we own that's made of metal. So over the years, the farrier shop's been responsible for designing, fabricating, and repairing, making any modifications to the original field artillery caissons. I'll go back to that and show you what I mean. Where that casket deck is now between those 2 rear wheels, there actually were 2 more ammunition chests and some attachment points, spare wheel, spare lever pole was slung underneath. They had some attachment points for Pioneer tools and Pioneer seats, and they actually had soldiers were able to ride on there. They didn't typically, but if you had to relocate in a hurry, you could hop up on there and ride off. And so we remove the ammunition chests and we add that gear on there. We shim and level it as necessary. There's not a lot of spring on it, but again, we're not cantering and we're not crossing ditches or bringing up the ammunition through the battlefields. And of course, no carriage could be pulled without the harness. Our harness is a replica of the 1916 field artillery design. It's the last major pattern change by the field artillery, and there's a breast collar and a saddle point. Prior to the motorization and mechanization, the 1916 was the last major pattern changes. We have incorporated a lot of the lessons learned from the old artillery regiments. The 16th Field Artillery Regiment, our direct predecessors, made some minor modifications to it. What you see there is actually a 1928 model of the McClellan, the last major model change for the McClellan saddle. The old 1904, which is on display down at the end in phenomenal condition, with the quarter straps, the billet straps, and the cinturings on the side. We've done away with those, and we now have side skirts, and underneath those are some billet straps, and we run a modern neoprene girth on most of ours. Some of them still use the old leather girths, and some actually have some fuzzies on there for some of our more sensitive ponies. But that's an open breast collar that you see, and I mentioned earlier we don't have traces. We don't have treaties in between our hitch. We have 6 horses hitched together, and the only attachment point between them is there on the breast collar, the trace loops. Our traces are braided steel cable wrapped in leather and hooked together using twisted chromed chains with the hook and circle of the old design. And so the primary reason for that is because when you get the artillery pieces to where they need to be, you don't want to necessarily keep the horses right there while they're firing, so they needed a method that was quick to detach the horses, and you can pony them away, you can ride 2 of them away quickly back behind a grove of trees or a major terrain feature to help shield them from enemy fire. Mr. Eugene Burks, whose picture was a little out of order, there he is. Mr. Eugene Burks is our saddler, and he is the man I ask if there are any questions about anything that's ever been made out of leather. He came to the platoon in 1981 as a saddler's assistant, retired in 1996. He came back the next week and got the job as our saddler himself. He's the one who actually found the plans for the 1916 harness. We found an old actual manual, saddler's manual, for the 1916 harness, which has your leather grades, it has your stitch counts, it has your cut angles and everything. It's a pattern book, and it's phenomenal. He has what may be the only hard copy in existence I've looked for the last few years. I didn't realize you guys were a resource I could reach out to, though. Now I feel silly. But he found that on a microfiche, actually, so he was able to print a copy of it. It's laminated and leather bound in his office. Prior to that, we were just sort of piecemealing together some driving harness and some riding harness and hoping that it would work out. But now with him in streamlining that process, we've saved the Army a ridiculous amount of money in strap breaks in the cemetery, as they do. He's able to know exactly which strap it was, just tell him what horse it came off of and where it came from. He can get you a replacement down there. He has a bunch hanging up on hooks in his office. And if not, then he can bring it up to him and he'll fix it, usually on the spot. So the McClellan saddle, that's one of our more iconic pieces of tack. Has anybody ever ridden a McClellan saddle? I know a couple of you have mentioned it to me. Man, that's something on your hind end, isn't it? Captain McClellan, moving west with the cavalry during the westward expansion, found that he was having some issues with saddle sores and girth gall, and some sore backs. And so he came up with a design. He claims it's modified from the Austrian and Hungarian designs. There's some historians that believe it came from the Spanish designs that were already present in the West. I don't know enough about either topic to argue that. But I do know that it's a wooden split tree wrapped in rawhide and then wrapped again in that ceremonial black leather that you see there. And it is definitely designed for the comfort of the horse. It takes all the weight off of the spine itself. There's no way to put weight on the spine when it's fitted properly. And it puts it right on those strong muscles on either side of the horse's back, right where they're designed to carry, where they've been bred to carry the weight. But unfortunately, those two wooden trees also sit just about directly up the middle of a human's hind end. You spend more than an hour in those things and you know about it. And we do 4 a day, 4 funerals a day. So our soldiers are in those saddles for anywhere from 8 to 12 miles a day. All at a walk, fortunately, we're not doing a whole lot of posting and trying. But, man, that can get you. And then, that's the only part of the tack that we can't make ourselves. Mr. Birch makes every other bit of it. Everything else that we put on the horses, it all comes from our in-house saddler shop. And we modify and maintain it as necessary. We have made some minor modifications to the 1916 pattern. You see the Johnson strap there. I suspect that's named for Chief Abdullah Johnson, the platoon leader at the time. But it's just a connection between the breast collar and the saddle, the 1 1/4 inch ring there on the saddle, to help keep the breast collars level for the line of draft. Our horses do vary pretty aggressively in size from the wheelers to the leaders, and so to keep the line of draft as generally straight as we can, we hold up the breast collars thus. We also have standing martingales. You can't see it in this picture, but the standing martingale comes from the breast collar just straight down to the girth. That'll prevent a newer horse sometimes from trying to back out of the breast collar when he decides he doesn't want to be in the hitch anymore and wants to go eat some of that delicious looking grass that's over there. So he'll try to back out, but it'll catch him. We also have some of the same issues that the field artillery faced. Some of you have read about the westward expansion, the sore backs, the sore withers. We face them the same way, and we're treated the same way today. We modify the neck yoke strap. We transition to a hippo setup where it takes the weight of the breast collar back to the saddle itself rather than to the neck yoke strap up on the withers. We changed the breast collar, and we added a quarter strap across the front to take the weight of the whipple tree if it's a wheeler. We'll also switch the horses out. We'll switch them from near to off if it's sore back, maybe taking a rider off of them and putting them on the off side for a little while, be a little better. Or we have the ability to rest them. Each squad has 10, only 7 go in, and if you're down too far, we have a special event or a ceremony that's taking place, a wave that's taking some of our horses. We can draw from one black horse squad to another, and that helps us too. But cleanliness of the tack is paramount. It's preached in all the old manuals, all the old field artillery manuals, and we preach it from day one, the day that we issue a Western saddle. In our training class, it is clean when we give it to you, and it will be clean or in better condition when you give it back to us. When the soldiers come out of the cemetery after our 3 o'clock funeral, you get back to the stables around 4:30 in the afternoon, 1600. You have about an hour left of cleaning tack, and we all know it. We use a glycerin saddle soap, hot water, more lather than water, rub the excess into the leather bind hand, a lot of the same manuals. As an infantryman, I spent 10 years in my career trying to stay ahead of the curve. I tried to learn about the newest weapon systems that the Army was fielding, tried to learn about the newest techniques that the enemy was using, and so you're constantly reading our own trade publications and everything. And then I got to the horses, and they handed me the 1942 Field Artillery Mounted Instruction Manual. Said, good news, it hasn't changed. Sweet, that'll make it a lot easier for me, then I only got to learn it for one time. But the manual is great, and it has everything that we use in it. It has the line of draft, it has all the adjustments for the saddles themselves, and we it is our Bible. I have a copy that is very worn and marked up and noted up in my desk at the stables. And there's the soldiers getting ready in the morning. That's one of our tack rooms, 4 tack rooms, 4 squads. I'm not sure which team that is. Looks like it's probably 2nd squad. But they're getting all 7 saddles ready in the morning. We start our day at 4:30 in the morning. Soldiers come in, lights are on. Horses are trained at 4:30. The rest of the lights go on. Horses go into the washroom. While the white horses are being washed every morning, 7 horses, takes 4 soldiers about an hour. While the white horses are being washed, the black horse team that's in that morning is polishing their brass. There's over 300 pieces of brass in that tack room that are shined every morning. Again, it takes 4 soldiers about an hour. And then at 5:30, they swap. White horses are now drying in the aisleway, black horses go into the washroom, and then the white horse team is able to work on their leather and tack. 6:30, tack up, saddles go on. 7:15, bridles in. 7:30, we lead them out to the hookup area directly behind the stables. Hitch both teams up. By 8 o'clock, we're out the door and down into the cemetery. We stay there all day. The soldiers are in from 8:15 until about 4 in the afternoon. We have 2 funeral services available at 9, at 11, at 1 in the afternoon, and at 3 in the afternoon. And the furthest funeral service from our stables is about a 20-minute ride, 25-minute ride. It's not bad. And it's a gorgeous ride, too. It does remind you, as you're riding into Arlington Cemetery, what it is we do. And if you haven't been to Arlington Cemetery, please, I urge you, you should visit it. You can read about it all you want to. You can read 640 acres. You can know 400,000 headstones and niche walls. But until you're standing at the bottom of one of the sections looking up the hill, and all you can see for as far as you can see is the white markers, the headstones that are down there, you really don't have an understanding of what it is to be in Arlington Cemetery and what it is to be honored to do what we do, and we know it every day going in. We've had 2 of those Caissons in service since 1942. They were transferred to the Caisson Platoon when we stood up in 1948, and then the others have been purchased as the need has expanded. We're going to wind up being capped at 4 squads. Arlington Cemetery has been in continuous use since the burial of Private William Christie, whose soldier was buried there. General Meade, quartermaster of the U.S. Army at the time, approved the use of the land that had been seized to fortify the American capital immediately following the secession of Virginia from the Union. Union forces crossed the river in 3 places and seized Arlington Heights. The problem was, from a defense perspective, rifled artillery of the day could range the White House, the Capitol building, from Arlington Heights, and so the Union Army couldn't tolerate running that. Washington, D.C. became then, and remains, the most heavily fortified city in the history of the world. No other capital city ever has been no other city has ever been as fortified as Washington, D.C. Many of the defensive rings have just upgraded their technology. They're still there. A lot of the installations are still there, protecting our seat of government. Fort Myer was originally Fort Whipple on Whipple Hill. It was expanded and named for a general of the Signal Corps, where Fort Myer was the Signal Corps headquarters for a long time, because you have a clear line of sight down to the War Department and their signals. Gentleman on top of the roof sending flag signals, and somebody's watching with a telescope, and you can send those signals all the way down as far down the coast as you've got bases set up for it. And so now there are over 400,000 graves and niches within the 640 acres of Arlington. And President Ronald Reagan, in his first inaugural address, spoke of Arlington, saying, "Those who say that we are in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look." The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David, they add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Belleau Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles at the place called Vietnam. All 5 branches of the Department of Defense provide ceremonial honor guards for funeral services conducted in Arlington Cemetery, but the cemetery is maintained and administered under the Department of the Army. The superintendent of Arlington Cemetery answers directly to the Secretary of the Army. And while there are Marines quartered at Joint Base Myra Henderson Hall, they are not the Marines who perform the funeral details, which lends a sense of ownership to the soldiers who live and work directly outside the gates. Every year for the Army's birthday, the Pentagon staff lead the run through the cemetery, which is different from most morale runs because the loud and boisterous soldiers in the cadences that we call stop as soon as we hit Old Post Chapel Gate, and we get quiet for the run through the green spaces. And when we come out the other side, that's when we get loud again as we're coming back towards breakfast and towards our stopping point. So there's no doubt among the soldiers that Arlington National Cemetery is ours. The men and women buried in it are our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, and our mothers. That it is our solemn responsibility to live up to the words from Theodore O'Hara's 1847 poem, Bivouac of the Dead. Those same words that are engraved in gilt letters on McClellan Gate, which is now inside the boundaries, but was formerly the entrance to the cemetery. Rest on, embalmed and sainted dead, dear as the blood you gave. No impious footsteps here shall tread the herbage of your grave. Nor shall your glory be forgot, while fame her record keeps, or honor points the hallowed spot where valor proudly sleeps. Of course, it's not only soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines buried in Arlington. 2 presidents are buried there as well. President Taft, who was buried by the 1st Battalion, 16th Field Artillery Regiment, and the men of the 3rd Cavalry, joined 543 others being buried in Arlington that year. President Kennedy, whose funeral service and procession are still vivid in the memory of many Americans, popularized Arlington Cemetery after an offhand comment to his wife a few weeks before his death that he could spend forever on the hill under the Lee House, looking across Memorial Bridge and into Washington, D.C. Today, the cemetery averages 3,500 funerals annually. This includes family members of those buried or who will be buried in Arlington. And nearly all services receive personal attention from the Service Honor Guards. Whether a special general officer funeral with over 100 Marines, a standard honors funeral with 6 sailors to carry the casket, 7 to fire the volleys, 1 to sound taps, and 1 to present the flag, or 1 airman to carry a family member's cremated remains to the gravesite and then depart the funeral service. It is our cemetery, Arlington is, and every year the Old Guard actually hosts flag standing. It is a tradition that belongs to us. It is the Old Guard's responsibility. Memorial Day weekend, Thursday before soldiers go in mass, and this is actually a picture from Memorial Day weekend a couple of years ago, and that's the only reason why. If you look kind of hidden in the back, in the right corner, you'll see the soldiers in the battle dress uniform and the ACU camouflage uniform. We don't wear that uniform into the cemetery very often, but for flags in, when we've got rucksacks and 400,000 American flags are going into the cemetery, we'll wear a little bit more serviceable of a uniform. And I actually have, if it'll play, another video that I wanted to show you about flags in that I think really captures the spirit of the soldiers in Arlington Cemetery.
So many souls, same sacrifice, for liberty, for country, for us. To be draped in the stars and stripes is to be graced by a nation's eternal gratitude. The ceremonies are solemn, but the sadness is felt side by side with pride. These are patriots. These are heroes who fell in the defense of freedom, and they will not be forgotten. So flags in for the courage, flags in for the cause, flags in for the freedom, flags in for the fallen, who we salute on this Memorial Day, and we will remember forever.
closing, it is my honor and my privilege, and I appreciate all the thanks that I've gotten for my service, but believe me, I know every day how lucky I am and how blessed I am to be allowed to be a part of anything in Arlington National Cemetery. Thank you so much for having me. Are there any questions?